All right, if you need to add a little more space to your pattern, typically these are called round back adjustments, and that means that we're going to be adding to the pattern to allow more space for the back or a rounded shape. It doesn't mean that you have a rounded back every time, but it does mean that the pattern is too flat for you. Maybe you do have a rounded back. So if you want to add a little bit more shape through here, I'm going to show you a few methods. One that's going to put it really high up right here. One that's going to put it right here in this middle area. And I'm going to show you how to do that with a pattern that is on the fold, so you can maintain your center back being on the fold. And I'm going to show you how to do this with a pattern that has a center back seam, which gives you a few more options. So you can see here that this is just not quite making it up here. If this was a whole garment, this is going to feel a little bit like the front's pulling toward the back, maybe even choking you a little bit. It's going to feel really constricted. The neck may even gape a little bit because it's just pulling so hard. The back might be a little short. Maybe, you know, if this was at the shoulder seam, you can see it kind of hikes up the back here. One of the ways you'll know that this is the area you need to target and add shape to is that all these other seams are pretty much in the right place and everything's fitting pretty good. You're just feeling a little bit like you just don't have enough space up here, or the front is digging into your neck and you really need to give yourself more. So if you've made a sample and you can alter that sample, the best way to figure out where you need this or how much you need this is to cut into your sample and let it relax and see how it feels and how much you need. So one of the adjustments I'm going to show you is right here at the high back neck. Now, if we had a pattern with a center back fold, we're going to put this cut right here at the base of the neck at the seam line. So my pattern here, this little sample, it doesn't have seam allowance at the neck or the armhole, but it does at the shoulder and the side seam. So right here, and maybe on your actual sample, this might be hard to do because you really can't cut off the edge there. Unless you have seam allowance, then you really can get in there. So I'm just going to get close. And I'm just going to cut straight over here and make a hinge. And we'll position this so that we can kind of see. So now if we wanted to make this so that it would meet the seam that we need to, so we have our seam allowance there going forward of the shoulder seam there, we can tape that there in place. Now we can see that we could do that little slice and we'd add that bit there and it would really make this sit so much nicer. I mean, look at that neck seam, that looks a lot better. So if that works for you, you can put a little piece of fabric behind there and tape it and kind of try it on, or record that amount for your high back adjustment. All right, so let's say that we know we want to add this to the mid back area, and maybe you know you have prominent shoulder blades. It's something you deal with often. Or maybe you're feeling like, you know, I think I really need some space in this lower area. So let's figure out how much we think we need to raise this up. And you can tell that this definitely has a rounded peak right here on this one. So we're going to cut straight across about where we think we're going to need this. I don't have seam allowance on my armhole or my neckline, so that's why I can go right up to the edge to make a hinge. So if you need to make a hinge and you have seam allowance, just make sure you cut up to the seam line only on both sides of it. All right, so let's just raise this up about that much. I think that that would really give us some nice space right there. I'm going to show you two options for adjusting this. One's going to go to the neckline and one's going to go to the shoulder, so you have a couple of options there if you're feeling like maybe one would work better for you than the other, or maybe there's some constraints with your pattern forcing you to use one over the other. So I'm going to show you a couple options there. All right, so let's mark this amount down and then I'll show you how to do this. I'm going to show you how to do these adjustments on a pattern with a fold and a pattern with a center back seam. So let's go do the pattern adjustments. All right, so let's take care of this high round back adjustment here. And the one I'm going to show you right now is for a pattern that's on the fold. And if you want a center back seam, just skip ahead to in the video. And I'm going to show you how to do this with a pattern that has a dart or doesn't have a dart. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to draw a line, and we need to draw this line right at the seam line of the neck. This is going to enable us to keep this on the fold. So you can go straight across, But as you'll see in the next line, being perfectly perpendicular to center back isn't as important. So we're just going to draw that line. This is really important that you stay right there at the center back neck seam. My red is the seam allowance. So same here. If you feel like you'll stay more accurate if you square off for just a little bit, and then you can just draw a line or just cut anywhere over to there. And this right here is my center back fold. All right, so we're gonna do these simultaneously. So when we do this adjustment here, we don't really wanna do more than 1/2 inch or 5/8 of an inch. And we also need this, if we want the pattern to stay on the fold, we need this to be right here at the center back seam on the neck. So if you're doing a center back seam here, you can put this adjustment anywhere within 1 inch of the neckline there. If you need more than that 1/2 inch or 5/8 of an inch space there, maybe consider doing also another line down here in the low back adjustment, kind of splitting it up a little bit, and that might help you get all that you need. All right, so we're just gonna focus on this high back, and you can combine the high and the low back in one garment. So we're going to slice over to here. We're putting a hinge right here, and we're putting a hinge right there. So we need to cut up to that point on the seam line on either side of the seam line. So there's one hinge, and we're avoiding the dart. Oops, I got a little messy there. Up to there, and hinge. All right. So now get a piece of scrap paper, and with that measurement of the amount that you need to remove, we're going to slip this piece of paper here, and I want you to tape it to the bottom edge first. So put the paper going above this bottom cut and try and keep this upper section out of the way, just like that. And now extend your center back line here. It's going straight up along center back, just like that. And we're going to make a little mark on this line, the amount that we want to spread it apart here. Right there on the center back. This little guy really wants to adjust. We're going to slide this cut line up to when it rests at that hatch mark that we added to center back. And now all that's left is just to make sure that you have a right angle here at the neckline, and you can trim off this extra paper. And I always secure these little slivers on the back with a piece of tape because it's kind of incredible. The little slivers, they really slide off. All right, so now we're going to trim that piece of paper off, and we'll trim this one off as well. And we can trim off this little bit hanging out there. So now I'm going to show you how to spread this one apart, and then I'm going to show you how to true up the seam here so that everything will sew to your other front. All right. All right, so now let's do this one here. And again, we're going to tape the piece of paper to the lower one here. I probably should have used a wider piece of paper there. And we're going to extend our center back, make our hatch mark, the amount that we want to add, and then pivot this so that our neck seam touches that hatch mark there, just like that. All right, now let's true up these seams here. Starting with this one here, we're going to straighten out the shoulder. That looks like the only thing we're really going to have to do on this one. I can see there's a little divot right here. So remember, we always work on the seam line. So we're going to connect our neck line at the shoulder to our armhole at the shoulder. So we'll draw a straight line between those 2 points. And then we add back our seam allowance. And then we've added this little sliver, which would be a lot bigger if this was a full-size pattern. But you can see we added that little sliver to make our shoulder straight. And more importantly, we don't really want to change the length of this shoulder seam. We want it to sew to our front. You can always double check by taking the front, laying it on top overlapping it along the seam line and going, all right, do I still have a nice transition between my front and my back? All right, now you can trim off this excess. I would definitely secure that little sliver on the underside with a piece of tape. And your last thing you need to do is just make sure you have a right angle here at your center back neck and trim off anything that isn't, or add a little bit if you need to. You really don't want this curve here to dip below your center back, because otherwise you'll have a little hump then. All right, so let's true up this one over here. It's gonna be roughly the same. It doesn't look like we've affected our shoulder as much, but you never know. So if we have a dart, we would definitely wanna make sure that we have still a nice smooth shoulder seam there. All right, so now let's true up these seams here. I'm going to trim off this little bit of excess under here, and we can trim off our excess over here. Let's make sure we have a right angle here at center back, and double check that we have a right angle. And if you have a seam here with a dart and you want to make sure that it's still nice and smooth, you need to pretend like you're sewing your dart. So I always like to pick up the leg. There's a little bit more about this in the drafting basics video. We'll fold it just like this. Use a little piece of removable tape to hold it. And now we can connect our seam line here, neck to shoulder, and make sure we have a nice straight line. Looks like we have a pretty good straight line. And then add back our seam allowance there. So it looks like we're good to go there. All right, so that's how you're going to be able to adjust your high back here while maintaining your center back fold. Let me show you the low back. All right, so for this lower back adjustment here, I'm going to show you how to do this two different ways. So you can choose if you want it to be adjusted going towards the shoulder or the neckline. So let's measure about how far down we want this line, and I'll do both of these simultaneously. We're going to square across all the way to the armhole here, and this is where one of our hinges is going to be. All right, so this one we're going to do for the shoulder, so we'll write shoulder here, and this one will go to the neck. So when I want to find the cut line for the shoulder, I usually follow roughly where a dart would go. So I'm going to fold the cut line here of the shoulder in half, and I get that little crease there, and then I just draw my line from shoulder down to that cut line, and our second hinge will be right there. Now for the neck, same thing, we're going to go down our center back here where we want that adjustment, square across, and then for the neck, I usually pick somewhere in the middle here away from the center back and the shoulder. I usually point it roughly where the dart is to kind of keep it in line with that, because this is usually pointing at the area where you have the most prominence in your back. Lastly, we just need to know how much we need to add here. So our first cut is going to be from center back to the armhole, and we're going to go up to the seam line on either side of it, just like that. We're going to have a little piece of paper ready, and we're going to spread this apart, tape the lower part to the piece of paper here, leaving the upper part loose. We're going to extend our center back line, so we have a nice straight line there, and we're going to hatch mark there exactly how much we want to add. Next, we're going to do our second cut, and we're going to go from neck to this cut line. Forgot to mark my other hinge, that's where it's going to be. So try not to cut any of this lower section here. So we'll cut straight down and not all the way through. And now we're going to lower this section here until this center back neck area touches our hatch mark here, just like this. And we're going to let this splay out just like that. And we're going to be creating a neck dart. All right, just like that. We're going to secure this in place. And we'll add a little piece of paper behind our dart as well, giving us some paper up here so that we can establish our dart shaping. All right, so now let's set this one aside. We've maintained our center back fold. We've added this mount to the center back here, which is quite a bit on this little tiny pattern. And we've added a little neck dart. And look at our shoulders really winging out there. But look at this nice shape we'd make. A nice little prominent spot there. So on the shoulder one, same steps. We're gonna cut from center back to the seam on either side of the seam. Piece of paper behind, tape the lower section, just like that. Square up our center back. Mark on our center back exactly how much we want to add. Make our second cut from shoulder down to the cut line. And now we're going to lower this section to our hatch mark there. And we're going to pull this over so that this splays out and this comes in line with our center back. So we can line up our center back on the mat here. So this is going to feel a little fiddly, and sometimes what I'll do is I'll secure this piece here, and then I lift this up and I'm kind of pushing right here on this hinge and letting it do its thing. You need all these pieces to be perfectly flat when you're done, otherwise you won't be able to cut it out. So this is quite a bit of shaping. You can see it pulling away from my center back there. All right, and we're going to add a piece of paper under this dart area so we can add some shaping there. And now we're just going to secure all of our pieces and we're going to true it up and get it ready for being cut out. All right, so now let's true up our pieces here. Because we're trying to keep this center back on the fold, we need this to be in a perfectly straight line. You can see I've added a tiny bit there. Sometimes you'll get that and sometimes you won't. It just depends on how much you're adding. And so if I feel like it's a significant amount, because we really don't want to change our neck length, because maybe we have a collar or a facing sewing to this edge and we don't really want to have to change all of our pattern pieces. Plus, maybe it fit the way it was and we don't really want to change that. So what I can do is let's square up our center back line here. Make sure we get a nice center back there. And it's really not that much. It's probably the width of my pin. So it's about the width of my pin there. When I see that, and I've added that 1/8 of an inch here, what I can do is split that amount and take it off either dart leg and make the dart a tad bigger. So basically just shaving off a little bit of that amount there. And then that way we haven't changed the neck length. All right, so now let's fold our dart, and the dart always folds away from center. And we're going to establish the shaping of the dart right along the neck seam. This is a pretty unique adjustment. Most people aren't adjusting things so that they have a neck dart, but it does give some really nice shaping, and you might try it. You might find it works better. Just because you don't see it very often doesn't mean that it doesn't work. It's just there's usually trends in garments and in fitting. All right, so I'm gonna use my removable tape to hold it in place. And now I'm gonna trim this edge flush. All right, and then let's trim this paper here. And now we can take off our removable tape and we can see there we have our dart and the shaping that we need right there. So it'll all line up when it's sewn. And so now let's just trim off this paper here. All right, like that. And now you have your dart right there. You haven't changed the length of your neck, your shoulder, or your armhole. The only thing you'll have to worry about is facings, because we've sort of changed the shape of this area here. So what I would do is make sure your facing still lines up with these 3 edges. And then if it doesn't, I would alter your facing. Let me show you how to do that. It's the same with your armhole. If you're using an armhole facing, you might need to adjust it because we've added this little wedge and the facing usually comes out to about here. Other than that, this length hasn't changed. The sleeve will be fine, and it goes for the same on this one. So we need to still shape our dart and add that center back area just like the neck, and then this one would be ready to go. So let me show you how to do a facing really quick. All right, so the first thing I'm going to do is draw my center back line there. And we want our dart to be folded as if it's sewn, because that's exactly how the facing is going to fit. So we're going to line this up on the center back there. We don't need this whole piece to be flat on the paper. You can see that it's lifting up quite a bit here. We'll just line this up and then we'll trace the neck and part of the shoulder. Now refer back to your original pattern piece for your facing and the width of it. And now you're going to make your new facing the same width as your original pattern piece. This way it'll still sew to other facings that meet it. All right, and then here's your fold. And then there you go. There's your new facing for your new upper back shape. And you can do the exact same steps for the armhole as well. Just remember that your armhole needs the seam allowance here and here. Neither edge is on the fold like the center back is. So now let me show you how to do this on the center back seam. So let's say we want to do both of these adjustments, a high and a low, or maybe just one or the other, and you want to add, or you have, a center back seam. So this is a lot easier because really all we need to do is slice from center back towards your armhole and splay it out as needed and as many places as you like. So if you have a dart, we're going to do the exact same thing as before. We can just work around the dart. If you want that high back, remember we want it to be within an inch of the back neck. And in the case of this little pattern, it'd be like within the 1/2 inch of the back neck, so it's a 50% size. So you'd want that slice there and then just go around the dart. And then you can add others where you need, and as many as you like. We'll do 2. And we're going to create a hinge out here. So we're going to cut towards our armhole in both of these places and then up to the seam line on the other side to create each of our hinges. I always start from the bottom and then work my way up. So we're going to secure the bottom here first, just like this. And the same thing, we're going to square up on our center back like this, and then draw on the center back line the amount that we need it to grow. We're going to pull this first section down to that first hatch mark there. And then we're going to repeat this with the next slit. Same thing. Make sure you leave enough paper over here for your center back seam, or you can add a piece at the end. All right, and again, now we're going to square up from this little section up like this and add our amount that we need along the center back, always along the center back. And now you have this nice curve here, and it will fit really nicely. I love center back seams. All right, and then I would secure all of your pieces of paper back here. And then if you don't have seam allowance, you can draw it in now, and you want a nice smooth curve here, parallel to your original fold line, or you can just smooth out your center back seam if you already have one here. You still want a right angle here at the neck and at the waist so that when this seam is sewn to itself, you have a nice transition. Trim this away here. We haven't changed the length of our neck, our shoulder, or our armhole. All of our pattern pieces can sew to this, like collars and sleeves. However, if you do have a facing to your neck or your armhole, you're probably going to need to adjust one or the other depending on which adjustments that you're doing. So you can see the previous section for how to make your facings. Now you can cut and sew your pattern with the center back seam and a nice rounded back adjustment. So let's compare our patterns and see what our changes did to it. This is our original here, and this was the high flat, and you can tell that it added quite a bit. We can't even see our pattern piece here. So we added this little lift here and at the shoulder here, which is going to create more space there. On the shoulder dart, same thing. Got that little lift and the raised neck, which is great. Let's see for the low back here. Now this one here, we did a little bit lower, so you can see it raised it up higher at the top here, and it canted our shoulder out because we added this contouring with the shoulder dart there. And then here is the neck dart. Kind of the same thing, but we have this contouring happening from the neck toward the shoulder blade there. So let's compare these two to one another. I always think that's kind of interesting. So this was our shoulder dart and this is our neck dart. And you can see the shoulders at the armhole ended up in the exact same place as one another, but the shoulder dart is right here and the neck dart is right here. So it definitely changes where you're shaping from, but to the same point. You can tell that that dart point is ending at about the exact same spot. Lastly, we have our center back seam here. I showed you on the one with the dart. So let's line it up there, and same thing. Look at that, we lifted all that up, and we can tell it's also pulling away from our back here because it was creating the most volume right here at the center of the back rather than over here, which was great for shoulder blades. I I hope you're enjoying my Fitopedia fitting series, and if you want to get more fitting tutorials, just check the description. There's going to be links to more. And if you would like a printed version of these mini tutorials, just check the description or look under the video, and eventually you'll be able to make your own little Fitopedia booklet. And it'll be a really great, quick, easy reference to how to diagnose and fit the issue that you're working on. So I hope you're getting a lot out of the series. Please let me know, like, comment, and subscribe, and follow along for more. Thanks for watching.